The headlines, Instagram posts, and speculation would make you think you know everything there is to know about the marriage of Will and Jada Pinkett Smith. But I'm here to tell you, you don't. And you know why? Because simply those things don't give you the full picture. Everything in life, including marriage, is full of nuance. The gossip we've been told and shared through the last 20 plus years lacks that. So on this episode of I Will Tell You What, I will try my hardest to give you more of that context so you can fully understand and emote to one of the more polarizing couples within Black Hollywood. We'll unpack the entanglement, the rumors, the blended family, Tupac, and everything else you could probably think of. So with that being said, you've been cordially invited to the 30th episode of I'll Tell You What. I Will Tell You What is a podcast that's all love, Black history. I Will Tell You What is presented by Hueido, and I'm Ashley, your favorite raconteuse that tells you these love stories every single Monday. So don't forget to subscribe on the tube of you or wherever you get your podcasts if you haven't done so yet. And follow us everywhere and join us on the Trion of Pay. So let's get to the point you've all been waiting for. Let's get into the story. So where do we start when reflecting on the love story of Will and Jada? I guess from the very beginning. So the year was 1990. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was on air, and a young Jada Pinkett walked past Will as she was there to audition for a guest spot on the show. Now, as Will tells it, he leaned over to Alfonso Ribeiro and said, quote, "Who the f*** is that?" She hadn't gotten the job because casting thought she was too short to play Will's girlfriend. But Will was instantly intrigued. He wrote, quote, "It was love at first sight." Now, I can't say the same for Jada. Initially, she recalled that first interaction as, quote, "hardly memorable." However, Will wanted to know more about her. He would later learn that she was cast on A Different World, and he was on a mission to get to know her. They'd see each other on occasion, but that was it. They really wouldn't connect until years later. This was, I think, in 1994. A mutual friend, Dwayne Martin, was at this lounge called The Baked Potato with his then girlfriend, Tisha Campbell. They had both called Jada and Will to join them there, unbeknownst to each other. And when they got there and the night was going on, they enjoyed themselves. Will said they, quote, "talked about everything." This was the night that changed how Jada saw Will. Initially, she thought he was, quote, "goofy," but then she learned that he was, quote, "a gifted conversationalist, well-read, and contagiously passionate about a wide range of interests." The night got away from them as they were engrossed in discussion for hours. Will wrote that then Jada, quote, "heard a voice speak clearly. That is your husband." Now, you might assume this would be the part of the story that because they vibe so well and because she heard that voice in her head, that the next part is Will basically asking her out and Jada saying yes, and then they start dating and all that. That's not what happened at all. You know why? Because at that time, Will was married to Sheree. The day Will met Sheree, he was on a mission. He wanted to see Jada. So when he learned that she was on A Different World and learned that they taped on Thursdays, he skedaddled his way to the taping. Now, along with Alfonso, he anxiously awaited to see Jada appear on set. But while watching the taping, he spotted, quote, "gorgeous caramel-skinned woman in the front row." He goes up to her, learns her name is Sheree, and they left, quote, before the show was even over. Jada who? They had a very whirlwind romance, and on May 9th, 1992, they got married. And 6 months later, because apparently they got jiggy, on November 11th, they welcomed their son, Willard Carroll Smith III, who would be called by his nickname Trey. With Sheree and Trey, Will achieve his familial and personal dreams. Just the three of them. Will said, quote, "I had wanted this my whole life, and here I was with my son, my wife, my family." Now, this gratitude came from a very genuine place. Quote, "From the time I was 5 years old, I always wanted to be married," Will wrote. He dreamt of committed monogamy and the family in which would come from that dedicated courtship. So when he was 18 and his rapping career was starting to take off, he began to date a girl named Melanie Parker. He loved him some Melanie, okay? He wrote, quote, "I wanted to build a life for us, to shield her from the chaos in the world. I wanted to do it right." But later, Will would learn that Melanie cheated on him, and eventually they would break up because Will began to loathe her through the rest of their time together. But initially, this wasn't his life with Sheree. He loved that she was, quote, "bringing life to the wife I had seen in my head." When he was younger, he admired the relationships of couples where the woman's role was to support her partner, ultimately contribute to his success. So, as you can tell, everything was good until it wasn't. So just as quickly as Will and Sheree got together, their marriage began to crumble. Why, you might ask? Perhaps it was because they got married too quickly. They probably didn't get a chance to really get to know each other before saying "I do," as they had only been dating for several months. Maybe it was the effects of the method acting for his role in the movie 6 Degrees of Separation that Will mentioned in his biography. It could have been because Will learned that Sheree actually wasn't perfect after all, which crushed the image of the ideal wife he crafted in his head. Now, more than likely, it was more than one particular thing, but according to Will, quote, "She was happy to live a simple life as a mom and a wife. I wanted to conquer." Early in their marriage, they both sensed that they were heading to a bad place and decided to take a beat. Sheree and Trey would go to her hometown in New York, and Will would stay in LA to give them time to contemplate how they could possibly move forward. It was during that marital selah that Dwayne Martin and Tisha Campbell invited him to the baked potato, along with an unsuspecting Jada Pinkett. Now that night would change their lives forever. But they couldn't go any further because Will was still married. He wrote, quote, "I knew with absolute certainty that Jada Pinkett was the woman of my dreams, but I had committed my life before God to Sheree, and there was no version of me ever going back on my word. It didn't matter, because on Valentine's Day 1995, Sheree filed for divorce." Later, she would say on the Red Table Talk that, quote, "And even to this day, thinking that I broke up a family, I didn't give Trey what I wanted for him." 5 days later, though still hurt by the ending of his marriage, Will called Jada. He got straight to the point though. Quote, "You seeing anybody?" She hesitantly replied, "No." Well, Will said something along the lines of, quote, "Good, you seeing me now," and thus begun a relationship, far from the public's eyes as Will's divorce continued. Will wrote, quote, "The blessed yet unintended consequence was that we spent every single moment together, just us." Those early months of dating were filled with leaving the country, loving each other down over and over and over again, and learning about each other. This is when Will learned about the man that held a very special place in Jada's life, Tupac Shakur. Now, Jada met Tupac at the beginning of her sophomore year at the Baltimore School for the Arts, which was in 1986, so before I was born. She wrote about her first memory of him. Quote, "He's wearing a thick, old school alpaca sweater and jeans. He has beautiful brown skin with big brown eyes, heavy eyebrows, and a tiny peanut head." They exchanged names, and that would start, quote, "a bond that would impact their lives forever." Now, Jada was drawn to Tupac, and likewise. Outside of their pursuits of the arts, Tupac wanted to be a rapper and Jada wanted to be an actress. They were both children to mothers that struggled with addiction. They gave each other things that the other needed. Jada wrote, quote, Pac made up for the lack of male protection and care I saw in my life. And because Tupac's mom struggled financially, Jada would look out for him with the money she obtained through her various jobs, including her time as a drug dealer. Yes, did you know that Stoney was a drug dealer? Eventually, as people in close proximity usually do, Jada wrote that Tupac wanted to see if they could be more than just friends. They kissed and both of them were instantly disgusted. She wrote, quote, it was literally like a sister and a brother trying to make out. Now, when he moved to California, they continued to stay in touch through letters and calls. And as their careers began to ascend, they tried to find ways to collaborate, but most of those attempts weren't successful. But Tupac must have felt like Jada was a safe place for him. When he was locked up for sexual assault in the 1990s, he wrote her a letter addressed to, quote, J.K. Shakur, J.K. meaning Jada Corinne, her first and middle name. Now, this letter basically said that Jada was the only one that really cared about him, and he ended the letter with a proposal. Yes, Tupac proposed to Jada. Who's obsessed with who? I'm kidding. Jada knew what this really was. He was yearning for loyalty and stability. She wrote he, quote, was expecting me to be not just a psychological wife, but a physical wife. I couldn't do it. Later, they joke about it, but maybe Tupac did feel like Jada was the one he could always fall back on if he really needed. Now, their friendship remained throughout his life, though became somewhat estranged as Tupac began to work with Suge Knight on Death Row Records. So, as she began to date Will, he wrote that, quote, in the beginning of our relationship, my mind was tortured by their connection. He was Pac, and I was me. So while Will was insecure and would frequently compare himself to Tupac, Jada chose him. She loved Will, and soon they would be bonded together forever. Jada knew immediately that she was pregnant. It was summertime, 1997. She was with Will in Cabo, and as he put it, quote, as the majestic movement reached its culmination, a shockwave shudders through Jada's body, and then panic. A look of abject terror washed over her face. Will didn't believe it, but yeah, Jada was right. She was pregnant. Now, she felt what many women feel when they get pregnant, a fear that this isn't the right time, I'm not prepared, and this will drastically change everything. Her mom, Adrienne, advised her to get married, but honestly, she wasn't sure if that was even the right move for her. Quote, even with my desire to love and be loved in that way, I'd been in the world enough to know how husbands and wives take each other for granted. She wrote, Will would propose to Jada by saying, there was no way I was going to have a baby without him marrying me. Now, Will proposed without a ring, so the following day, Jada said that she, quote, went to Harry Winston in Beverly Hills and bought my ring, a nice size pear-shaped diamond set in a platinum band. Now, you may be wondering, why did Jada Pinkett buy herself her own engagement ring? She said to take, quote, some measure of control and to remind herself that this and everything that was happening was real. Jada didn't want your standard wedding, if you couldn't tell. What she preferred was something simple and intentional. The two of them on top of a mountain, reciting vows to each other. No aisle, no bouquet, no bridesmaids, no reception with family doing the electric slide because, of course, this was before swag surfing. But Jada's mom and Will wanted a wedding. Her mom was like, you are my only child. You have to have a wedding. And Will agreed that this was an occasion worth celebrating with their closest family and friends. And it makes sense because he would write, quote, I love planning events, orchestrating spectacle and emotion. She conceded to having a wedding and even allowing her father to come despite their lack of a relationship. Adrian was responsible for planning the wedding. That was part of Jada conceding. Like, okay, just tell me when and where to show up and you handle the rest. And it was apparently, though, a really beautiful affair. On December 31st, 1997, yes, they had a New Year's Eve wedding at Cloisters Mansion in Baltimore. Will and Jada got married. They kept the location of the wedding from the guests until December 30th to keep this from the media as much as possible, as they knew the wedding was going to occur at the end of the year, but they didn't necessarily know where and when and all the details. So Will wasn't a man in black that day, but actually a man in a cream suit, and Jada paid homage to her grandma Marion by wearing a cream velvet gown like she did. Both Will and Jada's wedding attire was designed by Batchley Mishka. Their wedding had about 80 guests. The wedding was attended by many close family and friends, including Dwayne Martin and Tisha Campbell, who ultimately played matchmaker to this whole thing. Will's castmates attended, and Jada's homegirls, MC Light and Jasmine Guy, were there as well. The dinner was a seafood buffet. The decor was heavy on the candles. They had a DJ and a jazz band, which was probably a nod to the Baked Potato, the jazz lounge where they really met. And while Jada was, quote, overtaken with emotion and couldn't stop crying, Will noted that, quote, this would be the first of many compromises Jada would make over the years that painfully negated her own values. The blended family of Will, Jada, and Sheree that we know of today took some time and required some true maturity from all of them. Now, when Will and Sheree were going through their divorce, their son Trey was only 2 years old. Then, Jada had a very shallow concept of divorce. She associated it with a breakup. She didn't realize that it's way more emotionally involved than a clean break, especially when there's children involved. So she didn't really understand why Will would happily be on the phone with Sheree around the holidays. She wrote this time when she was in Jamaica with Will, Tisha, and Dwayne that her reaction to Will talking to Sheree and her mama pissed him off so much. Now, through the years and months, Jada and Sheree learned that they weren't each other's enemies, as they had a common love, Trey. Jada said after the wedding, quote, I kept my pledge that if I was going to be the loving bonus mom to Trey that he deserved, it was time to get past any resentments and misunderstandings that existed between Sheree and me. I could not proclaim to love Trey without embracing his mother. She coordinated a chance for just the two of them to get lunch, and that began the path to a healthy blended family. Once Sheree saw that Jada truly meant well and really did love her son, she was able to open her heart to the woman that married her ex-husband. Now, Jada refers to Sheree as her bonus sister, which, let's be real, is a very, very unique relationship between two women that found love in the same guy. You don't really see that too often. But this journey of healing begun while Jada was pregnant with Jaden. She delivered him on July 8th, 1998. Will, so mesmerized by witnessing his wife give birth to his second son, wanted to name him Jaden, quote, in honor of Jada. 2 years later, Will and Jada were pregnant again. They didn't know the gender of the baby and wanted to be surprised. But in a dream, Sheree learned the gender and told Jada. She said, quote, the little girl would have light hazel greenish eyes, but lighter and more cat-shaped. And she was right, because on October 31st, 2000, Willow was born. Now for Will, the idea of his family versus the reality became obviously different. He noticed how the media was excluding Trey and Sheree when referring to his family. Sheree wanted their son to have a normal childhood away from the scrutiny of the media. Will didn't necessarily agree with that. It would take them time, a lot of time, y'all, a lot of time for them to find a compromise that ultimately worked for their kid. Meanwhile, becoming a mom for Jada meant devoting herself to protect and provide a life for them that was better than the one she had. This would be something she would navigate and balance, even when she was at her absolute lowest point, the point of no return. And part of that was brought on because of the facade she maintained with Will for years. And eventually, it reared its head. Jada once told Will, quote, "Nothing in our world is mine." Now, those words echoed a lonely, powerless sentiment that described Jada's stance in their marriage. There's always this assumption that people with money and access should be happy. And if they aren't happy, they have the resources to make themselves happy. Now, that pursuit of happiness should be effortless and inflict no discomfort on themselves or anyone else. But that is not how real life goes at all, no matter who you are. So simply, Will and Jada weren't on the same page. Jada wrote, quote, "Will was living his dream, and that meant I must be living mine too, through him." Like this one time, Will came across a property outside of LA that he absolutely loved. It was huge, 256 acres with, quote, 5 existing houses on the property, a beautiful lake, horse stables, hiking trails, extensive chaparral, floral, and fauna. Now, he just knew in his heart of hearts that Jada was going to love this. He saw this home as, quote, "the physical manifestation of my love for Jada." But Jada, indeed, did not love this home. She saw this as a lot of work that would fall on her to maintain because he would be gone, traveling constantly for work. Now, despite how she felt, they got the house. Another time was their second anniversary, or rather New Year's Eve 1999. Jada said she, quote, "really just wanted to be quiet with my husband and family. But instead, Will wanted to usher in the Willennium and hosted the, quote, ultimate party of 99, which was put on by the Clinton administration to make people feel okay about the new millennium because people really thought that the end of the world was going to happen the second the clock struck midnight. The icing on the top would allow them to spend the night at the White House, which was something Will was so excited about. Jada was not, but again, like always, she was overruled. Over time, he said he, quote, could tell something was shifting. Jada was having almost daily crying spells. Will wanted to fix it as Jada's unhappiness meant to him that something was wrong with him. So he sought to plan the best 40th birthday party ever. He began planning this when she turned 37. He concocted a birthday weekend to beat out all birthday weekends, and not just hers, but yours, mine, anyone you can think of. The location was Santa Fe, one of Jada's favorite locations. The weekend would be filled with many of Jada's favorite things and people, along with a few surprises. Jada, however, did not want a big 40th birthday party. Then she realized she, quote, had been a high-functioning depressive for so long, but all that so-called functioning was ending. She told Will she wanted something low-key, but because a friend hinted to her the magnitude of the event, she just went along, as she would do. So all of what Will arranged was on 10, at 10, 20, 30, 100. He said, quote, "I shut down an entire hotel in the city, invited dozens of our closest friends and family. We'd have gourmet dinners each night under the stars, followed by a surprise event. Friday night would be a private art show. Saturday morning would be a spiritual pilgrimage. Mary J. Blige loved Jada and agreed to give a surprise performance on Saturday night." So not only that, Will planned for everyone to view this special documentary he secretly created on Jada's life and lineage. He got access to these photos and videos and letters from Jada's grandma, which was captured, quote, during the final weeks of her life. Will said, quote, "No one in the family had heard the tapes. They would be the centerpiece of my birthday presentation to Jada. He even tracked down a relative of the family that owned Jada's and got them to apologize to her on camera. So, while listening to everyone's reactions of like, oh, you did so good. How you gonna outdo yourself next year? Oh my gosh, can I be y'all's wife? Blah, 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 blah. Will's a geek, and he just knows she gonna love this. But looking at Jada through it all, quote, she sat motionless, refusing to make eye contact with me. Ultimately, this did not end well. Now, partially because they had varying thoughts on priorities, marriage, and what each other wanted and truly needed from the other. Jada wrote, quote, my 40th birthday was our breaking point. Will's love language of material and experiential extravagance was how he knew to connect. It was difficult for him to hear that I didn't need all of that. I just needed him. Will said, quote, neither one of us wanted a divorce. We knew we loved each other, and some aspects of our union were magical. But the structure of the life that we had established was strangling both of us. This would lead Will and Jada to separate. The marriage of Will and Jada has given us so many headlines and conversation topics throughout the years. Like the following. Jada Pinkett Smith, quote, wish she and Will were swingers in resurfaced clip. Jada Pinkett Smith calls Tupac her, quote, soulmate despite 19-year marriage to Will Smith. Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith deny claims he slept with Dwayne Martin. Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith confirm her, quote, entanglement with singer August Alsina on Red Table Talk. Jada Pinkett Smith insists she did not cheat on Will Smith. We're in a, quote, beautiful place. Jada Pinkett Smith says Oscar slap reaffirmed her marriage to Will Smith after years of separation. Quote, I'm leaving here as your wife. And so many more, child. So many more. But based on their memoirs and interviews, most of this was heightened, obviously, for virality. Like, yes, Jada did call Tupac her soulmate, but meant it from a friendly perspective. Have you never heard of someone call their best friend their soulmate? People say that. Like, that's all their relationship was. Like, bro, they were just friends, really good friends. Both Will and Jada both claim that their good friend, Dwayne Martin, is just that, their friend. Jada wrote when, quote, controversies got out of hand and folks believed Will and I were swingers or that we were both gay and playing as each other's beards or what we were sleeping with whomever we choose, whenever we choose. All I could do was sit back and shake my head. The entanglement, however, was something we saw play out on a Red Table Talk episode with Will. Now, Jada said that her and Will were on the same page coming into the episode, and she wanted to discuss it on her show because, quote, I was not willing to allow someone else's narrative to put a shroud of shame on me. Now, Will came on the show and, quote, seemed to convey that he had been done wrong. Jada said she should have stopped the episode there, but because she don't essentially want to call Will a liar, quote, my habit of self-betrayal overwhelmed me and I swallowed my own voice. And about one of the most recent incidents, the one people are still talking about, the infamous Oscar slap of 22, which is wild to think that was almost 2 years ago, where Will slapped Chris Rock in defense of Jada. So many narratives arose from this one. Oh my gosh. Jada wrote, quote, I can't tell his story of why he did what he did, but I can tell you it has everything to do with Will's own personal battles, which unfolded on a world stage. Now, just based off what I read in their memoirs, perhaps it was because at his core, Will is a, quote, provider and protector. His worth as a man is aligned with his value to his family. His brand has been attached to this as well. But Will wrote about trying to break from a feeling as if he had to maintain a certain image and give himself grace to, quote, put honesty and authenticity above his need for approval. So for Chris to make a horrible joke about his wife, no matter how you want to digest their relationship. That's still his wife. This was just not going to like slide. Like this was just not going to happen. Will was like, absolutely not on my watch. So Will wrote, quote, Jada and I agreed that we would ride together for this lifetime, no matter what. And she echoed that sentiment, saying, quote, the only thing I could guarantee was that I wasn't going to leave his side. Through all the BS between Will and me, when it's all said and done, this is what I do. I'm a ride or die. So the marriage of Will and Jada still may leave you with more questions than answers. But as I see it, essentially, this is a couple that got married in their 20s, that evolved through their marriage as all couples should. Now, their evolution forced them to be uncomfortable and realize their flaws, but in front of the entire world. The bastardization of journalism didn't give much room for their entire story to be shared with the same vigor as the clickbaity pieces of their story. So through over 30 years of life together, they found that what works for them in this stage of their life is to amicably separate, remain the best of friends, and perhaps, if it suits them both, they will find their way back to each other romantically. But only time will tell. And that, Aisle Runners, concludes the love story of Will and Jada. Subscribe, follow, support on the Treon of Pay, and I'll see you next week as we wrap Black History Month with the love story of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and his wife, Coretta Scott King. See you in the pews.